Welcome into the Swamp 247 podcast. I'm Jacob Rudner alongside Blake Alderman. And Blake, it's a little bit of a new look podcast for us since our staff change. Been a bit since we've done one of these, but we have plenty to talk about now that we're back. And we'll start with the big news that the fan base has been talking about. There's been plenty of meltdown, plenty of freak out from the fan base early on after Florida had, I would say, probably a subpar, understandard month of June in recruiting overall. So I would say first, let's just catch up on what has gone on since our last show and what the reason is behind the fan reaction, especially on the Swamp 247 message board. Just what's going on.
Well, it's been a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. Obviously, Florida's added a handful of commits in the month of June. They've seen a lot of targets they really wanted commit elsewhere. Um, you know, I think the starter, is the big one of the quarterback of Jaden Rashada, who picked Miami after Florida was, really trending there before he pushed back a decision date. The good has definitely been outweighed by the bad when you see a lot of these top targets have been picking elsewhere. That's pretty typical in recruiting. Everyone always remembers the bad news more than they remember the good news. But the way that the month of June ended for Florida, you could see that the air really kind of started to come out of the balloon there. Just seeing a lot of these guys commit elsewhere. So it's been a fun month, and I think it's taken. I feel like the month of June has lasted for like 6 years for me. So it's been great.
Yeah, it's been a busy month, but one of the things that you had mentioned recently that you said you had never even seen before was Florida lost out on a commitment from top-rated center Roderick Kearney. He committed to Florida State a half an hour after leaving Florida's campus on his official visit. You've never seen that before. That's a
I have not.
that's a big loss for Florida. What happened there? I know that you had been reporting that Florida actually felt pretty good about his recruitment and kind of where they stood within it. So what exactly went down with him?
He took the an unofficial visit the week before. So last like a week ago, he took the unofficial visit to Florida. Was there for 2 days, Monday and Tuesday. One of his teammates, who he's really close with, was offered as a preferred walk on, a wide receiver. Florida had felt like that he I guess let me start at the beginning. Heading into whenever Florida staff was hired, they felt like Florida State was the wide, pretty gap leader, which was kind of what a lot of the whispers and the buzz on the recruiting trail kind of backed up to, that Florida State was in the prime position for this recruitment.
Right.
He got his first ever visit back in the spring. He brought his mother. Really kind of spoke highly of it. Said that Florida had become a factor in his recruitment. Then he takes that second visit that I mentioned in June. Said that Florida is continuing to build some momentum there. Sets the official visit for this past weekend, and spends the weekend there. The intel coming out of there, from the Florida side, seemed that they had really kind of closed the gap significantly on what Florida State had early on. They felt like they were a player there. They didn't feel like a commitment was imminent for him. They didn't feel like a decision was imminent. I'm out there, waiting to interview some visitors when they leave. He was, we were told, no interviews coming out of the visit. And maybe 30, 45 mintes later, when he's on his car ride back home, he puts up the edit that he's committed to Florida State. So I've seen guys that have made decisions after taking official visits, obviously, whether it's just, whether it's the school that they just visited or another school or, whatever that may be. But I have never seen one that has been in the car on the way home, fresh off a visit, and that quickly of a turnaround. So that was the first for me.
Right. And one of the things that we were reporting was that Florida really had no idea, or at least it seems like they had no idea that this was going to be coming. They seemed somewhat blindsided by Kearney's decision to commit to Florida State. Is that something that's concerning to you? Like where does that stack on the concern list? Because again, Florida's staff is still new. They have not coached a game yet. It's their first round of full recruiting cycle in the SEC. Remember, Billy Napier comes from the Sun Belt, so he doesn't even have really experience as a head coach in this conference at all. Is this a concern? Is it something to keep an eye on? Where does this kind of rank on the concern index?
I think it's pretty concerning. I think that, one of the parts of recruiting is being able to read these guys, these recruits, kind of have all your ducks in a row. And whenever you have a coach like Billy Napier that, you talk about how orchestrated he is, how organized, how, he can visit a high school, 1 month and come back a couple months later and he'll remember the same conversations that he had with someone while he was there. So I think whenever you have someone that has been painted as being meticulous and all those things, you never want to get caught off guard on the recruiting trail. So I think the fact that it was such a blindsided move, I think it's concerning. I think it's something that, I don't know that you would hit the panic button over. I'm not saying it's good by any means, but I think it's something that you need to learn quickly and you need to make sure that this does not happen again.
Right. And Florida has seemingly felt strongly that they were in at least a positive position, if not leading, for several other kids. It wasn't just Kearney. Rashada, I think at one point was kind of in a similar boat where Florida at least felt somewhat confident about where they stood in his recruitment, maybe top two, if not first. But there are other guys. Grayson Howard, they felt very positively about, although it seemed like that was always kind of trending towards South Carolina, where he committed on Monday. Tomarion Parker committed to Penn State. He was teammates with cornerback AJ Harris, who committed to Georgia, and Florida felt great about AJ Harris coming out of his visit a couple months ago. Trayon Webb, a running back who has ties to Florida, long been considered almost a lock to go to UF, has crystal ball picks to go elsewhere. Peyton Kirkland is another guy who Florida felt really good about for a while and seems to be trending in a different direction. Where is Florida standing for real with those guys? And I'll go back to the same question. Are you starting to get worried about the shape of the 2023 class for this staff and where they're headed right now?
I think so. I think whenever a lot of those guys you mentioned had made multiple visits to Florida, I think whenever you're seeing, the multiple visits happen, it's almost kind of like, you're being put in the friend zone almost, whenever you're dating a girl and, she hangs out with you all the time, but, you never really, get in there to a relationship. You're just kind of, you're the friend. And, I think whenever you see a lot of these guys, they have plenty of positive things to have about the coaching staff. One of the biggest gripes that I had on the former coaching staff was their ability to close. Closing is an elite talent in recruiting. Some are just good at it, and some are just not good at it. And heading in, I was really positive when you look at what this staff did last December, heading into the early signing period. I think that they made significant moves with some big time players, and that really kind of had a lot of people excited going forward. Obviously, February, you saw some of these targets commit elsewhere, but it's tough whenever you're hired and you have a couple months to really build your board and, kind of close out these things. And, to an extent, they're still playing catch up with a lot of these guys. I think that, a lot of areas in the state of Florida, there were some sour relationships from the former staff that this new staff has had to dig themselves out of. But, whenever you have a lot of these guys that have visited multiple times, you don't want to see these guys make these types of visits to Florida and still pick elsewhere. I mean, you mentioned guys like, Kearney, who we already touched on. I think Grayson Howard has always been a pretty heavy lean to South Carolina. But you have, Mike Peterson, who came over from South Carolina and was involved in recruiting him from South Carolina, and who has, ties to Jacksonville, was recruiting Jacksonville for South Carolina. You see a guy like that at a position that Florida really needs to add some players at. You don't want to see them get beat out by South Carolina. That's just not something that a lot of people are used to. A guy from Jacksonville that's picking South Carolina. Granted, he did visit there 9 or 10 times over the course of his recruitment. But, I think it's concerning whenever you see that, that Florida has ground to make up on these guys, but they're still not able to do that. Even though they're having these guys visit, I mean, look at Grayson Howard, to put him in for an example. He visited 3 times in the month of June alone, leading up to that commitment to South Carolina, an official visit and then 2 more unofficial visits. And he still picked the school that everyone had really expected him to pick for the last several months. And it doesn't matter if they get him on campus a couple times, they're just not able to close that gap. With AJ Harris, that one was a little bit more of a wilder recruitment, I think, because that's a guy that, had given Florida some strong indication in the spring that he was going to pick them. You see the sunglasses emoji that was made for him. He was able to, walk away from that visit without making a commitment, and then ended up sliding back to Georgia. So I think, again, that's another one where you would want to see things close. That's not a big position of need for Florida, but it's just to be able to stockpile 5-star type of talent is things that this staff wants to do to improve the roster. Tomarion Parker, Florida was really, that was one that they really had to dig out of a hole from, because I think the old staff, and I've written it a couple times and he's mentioned it a couple times, that he really just did not like the old staff. He visited for the spring game, seemed to get Florida in play, came back again for an unofficial visit. That's one where I'm curious to see if he does take visits down the line, because he did commit to Penn State, was his first official visit, decided not to take any others. So that's one that I'm curious to see if things change in the fall. I don't know if it's necessarily that Penn State's going to have a bad record that I'm feeling or anything. It's just, a guy in the South that's committed to a school up north. You just see that, the closer it gets to time, is he going to have that change of heart to where it's like, well, man, I've got these options. I got these visits. Do I want to check out some of these places close to home? So that's one that I would, at least just my complete opinion, I wouldn't be shocked if he takes visits down the line, into the fall, go check some games out. I think Webb would be a significant blow for Florida. He's D. Webb's cousin, like you mentioned. He has those ties as being a legacy to Florida. He's visited, I couldn't even tell you how many times he's visited. I would say close to 10. And that's just kind of ballpark there. He's visited a lot. So, for him to go in there for Penn State and take that one official visit, and if that one does change the tides for Florida, that's one where, they weren't able to close again. I've heard that Florida's still been in contact with Webb. They feel like Penn State is a threat for sure. They feel like that visit went really well, and that Penn State is a team they're certainly watching. But they feel like the conversations they've had with him, they've kind of smoothed things over, that, where it's not, they aren't conceding him, I guess is what I'm getting at. So, but Webb, I have logged a crystal ball for Florida. I haven't changed it yet. I'm keeping a much closer eye on it right now.
Yeah.
But earlier on, man, even whenever I was feeling Florida, there was always some feeling in my gut that, you have to remember, this is a guy that was committed and decommitted from two different schools twice before his junior year was even up. So is it shocking that there's a little bit of late drama here in this recruitment leading up to his June 30th commitment? I don't think I'm shocked by that at all. But I do think that, and it ties back to, a lot of people that were upset about the AJ Harris decision, him obviously trending away elsewhere. Billy Napier puts out the sunglasses emoji, and and it doesn't come to fruition. But this is, Webb is another guy that, the why not Florida tweets that were all up there, and these are ones where, they are really trying, they're really putting in the effort. It's concerning whenever you see these guys that are ended up trending elsewhere. We'll see if that's the case with Webb. There's still a couple days leading up to that decision. A couple days in recruiting is almost like an eternity. So we'll see if they are able to kind of fend off these late official visits. Rashada is a big blow. There's really no way to put it. Florida was the odds-on favor there. You talked to a lot of people leading up to his at one point earlier decision, which was June 18th. Florida was looking like the team to beat. He decides to postpone things, takes an official visit to Miami, who was a school that earlier on in the year had significant buzz after he took an unofficial visit there. And I think that the fact that they were able to get him in on that official visit, Miami was still able to land his commitment, even though they already had another QB commitment. Florida really had checked off a lot of boxes for him as far as playing time. NIL was big with him, and Florida was obviously, playing the game with that, with Rashada. So, to see a guy like that, come in and have Miami swoop in the last week, that's a gut punch. That was a gut punch recruitment for Florida.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that a lot of fans are going to want to know, and whether or not we can fully educate them on it right now is remains to be seen. I think it's a topic that we're all still kind of trying to figure out. But the NIL aspect for Florida is now becoming a serious question because, like you said, NIL played a massive factor in the recruitment of Jaden Rashada. It's been widely reported that Miami and Florida got into some sort of a bidding war. Billy Napier has made comments publicly that he does not want to be in bidding wars as a team. It doesn't agree with his philosophy. What do you think about that comment in general, and kind of what needs to happen with Florida from an NIL perspective? Not necessarily talking about their available finances, but just with the way that they're going to approach it moving forward in order to remain in the race for some of these top prospects like Jaden Rashada, who they weren't able to close on, presumably because NIL played a factor.
I don't think that I know enough right now on NIL as just far as, where Florida's at stance wise. You've seen a lot of parents that have talked about that Florida's not really, really conversing. They're not really, it doesn't seem like NIL is something that I think that Florida staff is still learning a lot about. And I think that a lot of staffs are dealing with that, of, kind of the lay of the land, what can you do? What can't you do? I think that NIL is something that the staff is struggling with on the recruiting trail because, and it's tough because, a lot of the staffs, they aren't actively involved in NIL. So, it's kind of like something that they can't necessarily control. You can, I don't know. I guess I assume that you could have conversations with recruits whenever they're on visits about, what's going on in that aspect. But I think that this staff just doesn't seem to be as aggressive with it as, the Texas A&Ms, the Miamis, Michigan State, some of those types of schools that, have
Sure.
have been thrown out there of being involved in NIL and, being really aggressive about that. And there's just no rules right now on it. There are some obviously, but it's kind of like the Wild West out there with NIL. And I think that Florida is trying to do things about in a certain way, whereas other schools are just kind of doing whatever they want to. And, with no restrictions on there, it's like, you're driving a souped up car on, a straightaway, highway with no speed limits, and is it something that they're going to enforce later? So it seems like Florida's kind of, riding the, what you would think a speed limit would be on a road, to where, well, are they going to pull me over? Is there a speed limit? So I think that a lot of these schools are driving balls to the walls, and I don't really get that vibe from Florida. So I think that is something that's holding them back as far as NIL.
Yeah, and we might not be talking about the superstar level recruitments that I think fans want us to be talking about and those guys committing to Florida, but Florida has landed now several commitments, especially since we last recorded an episode of the Swamp 247 podcast, excuse me. Just let's talk a little bit about those guys. Florida has 8 commitments right now, 7 of them from the state of Florida. They rank 38th overall, I believe, in recruiting in the 2023 class as of Monday when we're recording this. Results, not, I think, what fans were expecting, but they are bringing in recruits. They are absolutely living within this footprint. Every single one of their every single one of their commits comes from within a 350-mile radius. What do you think about the guys that they have in the fold now and with what they've been able to do with those guys?
I think that when you're looking in the state of Florida, that's an area where, the coaching staff, fans really wanted Florida to get more active in, kind of, keeping these guys home. I think they've done a good job with that, obviously, when, the numbers you throw out there. I like a lot of the players that they have added. I think Creed Whittemore, who, 24/7 Sports already has as a top 247 player. He's got the speed. He's really shown that, through the track season this spring. Has played some quarterback predominantly for his high school, but whenever you've seen him work out at wide receiver, I got a chance to see him do that at Friday Night Lights last July. And he was, Florida had some really good defensive backs out there at that camp, and he was doing, a very good job, had the wiggle, had the separation, showed good hands. There were a lot of things that, he really stuck out at that camp with. So I really like that take, and I think the speed that he's shown this spring, slot receiver is a big need for Florida this class. They have a lot of these taller guys. Adding some speed, being able to take the top off of a defense, I think is important. And I think he checks off a lot of those boxes there. Najee Harris, Bryce Lovett, and Tommy Kinsler, they're all offensive linemen for Florida. So I think that's a good start for Florida's offensive line class, because I feel like I've been saying this, I feel like I've been in a twilight zone for the last several years with Florida. Whenever you talk about what's the biggest need, what's the area they need to prove at, it's offensive line. So I think that going into the end of June and having 3 commitments at that offensive line position, it's a good start for Florida. They've got, guys like 4-star Monroe Freeling, 4-star Lucas Simmons. They've got those types of guys still on the board for Florida as far as, offensive linemen that they're still recruiting going forward. So I think they've got a good start to the offensive line class. They need to continue to build in. You would like to see some of those, top 247, top, 150 type players, end up in Florida's class. I think that's what you need to see next. But I do like the start they've had on the offensive line.
Yeah,
you look at, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
A defensive line is another big position for Florida. Isaiah Nixon, the 4-star, edge rusher who is being recruited as a jack linebacker by Sean Spencer and Mike Peterson, flipped from UCF earlier in the month of June after taking an official visit. Was a guy that Florida turned the heat up on, closer to the spring evaluation period into June, whenever they set that official visit up. Takes the official visit to Florida, flipped a couple days later or a day later or something to that effect. So I think he's a guy that if you get him in that system, he's been productive as far as, 10 sacks as a junior, 75 tackles total. So I think that you've got something to work with there. Build him up, build his frame up. That's a guy that in a couple of years could, be a big time player in the SEC. Gavin Hill is a guy that, the local 4-star defensive lineman from the Gainesville area was a guy that camped at Florida, was offered the same day. And people that I talked to that were at the camp had nothing but great things to say about his camp performance. They loved his aggressiveness. They loved what he did in one-on-one settings. They loved that the guy even went out and played some tight end and showed how athletic he was. So that was a guy that, immediately got the offer, was a guy they wanted. 10 days later, he's committed to Florida. So, again, areas that they really wanted to hit, such as, the wide receiver position, the offensive line position, and the defensive line position are all areas that Florida did a great job of hitting in the month of June. Some of those guys, you need to continue to add some of those elite guys, going forward. But I think what they've done in the month of June, as far as those positions that were needs, have been great.
Absolutely. And the thing that I was going to say, sorry to interrupt you. The thing that I was going to say is I think 2 of those 3 offensive linemen who you mentioned, Bryce Lovett and Tommy Kinsler, I think they outplay their ranking. I think that those are 2 guys who have the potential to rise up before things are all said and done, especially Kinsler. I think he's an aggressive, athletic guy. And you commented on Gavin Hill's camp performance at Florida. I think Kinsler was another guy who I heard from talking to some people who were able to watch him, who had a really strong camp performance. I know Florida staff thinks he's underrated, and that's not just because he's committed to the program. I think they really do think that I believe it's a low 800s ranking at the moment. I think that they think that is far too low for him, and I don't necessarily disagree. So I think, to your comment, not only have they brought in 3 offensive line guys, and granted, not the elite ones that I think fans are expecting and that the class really needs, but the guys who they do have in the fold are quite talented. and their ranking might not necessarily reflect that at the moment.
You know, and it's funny you mentioned Kinsler. I can't remember what cycle it was. It was the year that Florida landed Jake Slaughter. That Trinity Catholic team in Ocala, they had like 3 D1 guys that ended up going D1 on the offensive line.
Yeah.
And if you talk to people, coaching staff guys, guys that are in the area, just contacts around Ocala, they said that even whenever Kinsler was an underclassman, that he was the guy that had the highest upside on that offensive line. So I think that speaks a lot of him, of a guy that was an underclassman at the time and was still, getting pointed out as being a guy with the highest ceiling on an offensive line that had like 3 D1 players. So, I agree. I think he's a guy that does outplay his ranking down the road. Offensive line is a hard position in general for, recruiting sites to scout. You just never know how bodies will mold down the road. I mean, I've seen 5-star offensive linemen not work out, and I've seen 3-star offensive linemen outplay their ranking. So that's definitely a hard position to handle. But I do like Kinsler a lot, and I think he's a guy that I agree. I think he outplays his ranking.
Absolutely. And for anybody curious, those three guys were Jake Slaughter, who's currently at Florida, Gardner Langlow, who's at Auburn, and Caleb Johnson, who's currently at Notre Dame, who played along that offensive line at Trinity Catholic with Tommy Kinsler. And with that, Blake, our final thing, what can fans look forward to on the recruiting front? Who is out there that has a commitment date coming up soon, month of July, with Florida really in the mix, maybe even a leader for? Is there a list of guys who fans can look out for?
Malik Bryant, the 4-star linebacker, Peyton Kirkland, the 4-star offensive lineman. I think those are two guys that they will be committing on July 23rd. I think those are two guys that I don't know that I would bet on Florida right now. I think for Bryant, there's obviously still a month or a little under a month before he makes his decision. I'm looking at Miami and Florida being the biggest battle there. I think that I would lean Miami at this point. With Peyton Kirkland, I would lean to more of a Michigan State, Oklahoma battle. I have heard that, there are some concerns that Florida's kind of backed off a little bit. I wouldn't say they have completely pulled out of that recruitment, but I would say that if there's a gas pedal on it, they've started to ease off of it a little bit. So I think that that's one that I could see trending elsewhere. Trayon Webb, we already mentioned. That's one where I'm kind of seeing how things go the next couple of days. June 30th decision date. Right now, I would say it's a Penn State Florida battle. South Carolina has just got him on campus for an official visit. I'm not sure if that changed anything there. Just coming off the visit, I haven't heard anything new there. Francis Mauigoa, the 5-star offensive lineman, he'll be making his decision on July 4th. We've heard different teams that could be involved there. I think the three that are probably most talked about, I think Tennessee is where I'm leaning right now. USC, I think, is a factor, and I believe Florida's a factor. I think you could even throw Miami in there too. They've had some buzz in there. I'm looking at Tennessee for him right now. But that's one that where it seems like it's still, I wouldn't say it's a wide open race, but I do think that there are some teams that haven't quite conceded where they are at yet with him. Derek Leblanc, the 4-star defensive lineman from down in the Osceola area, recently named to Final 3 of Penn State, Oklahoma, and Florida. He'll make his decision on July. What day is it? I know you just wrote it. Was it July 28th?
July 28th, yeah.
July 28th. So he'll make his decision then. There's been some whispers that his Kissimmee Osceola teammates, cornerback Jakeem Jackson, 4-star defensive lineman John Walker could be making the same decision with him. I haven't seen them announce any sort of commitment dates yet, but that's something certainly to keep an eye on. So those are another guy too, 4-star edge guy Keldrick Falk out of the state of Alabama. He's down to about 4 schools. He'll make his decision on July 5th. That's one where I'm leaning of it being more of a Florida State Clemson battle. I know Florida still had some dialogue there. We'll see if anything changed there. He's taken 4 official visits in the month of June. Auburn is the in-state school. I haven't heard much buzz on them. I've heard a lot of buzz on Florida State and Clemson so far with him.
Absolutely. Well, that'll do it for us, Blake, on our return to the Swamp 247 podcast after a little hiatus. Any final thoughts from you before we get out of here?
Not really. It's the dead period now. I'm looking forward to things slowing down a little bit, but then I look at all these decision dates that are going to be popping up over the next couple of weeks, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, what is a dead period? Like, I don't even know what that is anymore. I think the only thing dead inside is me.
There you go. Final thoughts from Blake. He's dead inside, and that'll do it for us on the Swamp 247 podcast. Make sure you keep it locked on the website for more news with regard to football, basketball, and baseball. And we will see you next time on the podcast.